In Episode 50, Perform Operational Risk Analysis to Guide Controls, we focus on bringing all the moving parts of your security program back to a single question: what could actually hurt the business today? Operational risk analysis is about aligning live defenses with real hazards and business-critical outcomes instead of abstract lists of threats. It forces you to look at how systems behave under load, how people really work, and how customers experience failures, not just how architecture diagrams look. For an exam, this is where control catalogs turn into concrete protection plans that leadership can understand. When you treat risk analysis as an ongoing operational discipline rather than a one-time workshop, your controls start to reflect how the organization really runs. A disciplined analysis begins with an inventory that is far more than a static asset list. You catalog services, including customer-facing applications, internal platforms, and batch processes that move money or sensitive data. Alongside those services, you document dependencies such as databases, queues, cloud services, and identity providers, because failures there often create the most surprising outages. Privileges are included as first-class elements, covering which roles can perform powerful actions, where administrative access exists, and how automated agents are authorized. Finally, you identify customer-impacting transactions and flows, such as payment authorizations, refunds, settlement jobs, and reporting feeds, because these are where operational risk turns directly into financial and reputational harm. Once you know what exists, you turn to plausible failure modes, threats, and abuse scenarios using current intelligence as your compass. Failure modes might include overloaded payment gateways, misconfigured firewalls, stale certificates, or delayed batch jobs that leave balances in flux. Threats align to these weaknesses, such as account takeover attempts, ransomware, data exfiltration, or fraud exploiting timing gaps between systems. Abuse scenarios add a creative layer, imagining how legitimate features like self-service portals, application programming interfaces, or administrative tools could be twisted for gain. Threat intelligence, industry reports, and your own incident history all help separate theoretical risks from those that fit your architecture and sector. This step anchors the analysis in today's adversaries and technologies, not last decade's headlines. Estimating likelihood and harm is where you move from stories to comparable numbers, even if the scales are qualitative. You define calibrated scales for likelihood, such as rare, possible, and expected, and for impact, such as limited, serious, and severe, making sure each label has concrete descriptors. Empirical production telemetry, including incident frequencies, near misses, performance spikes, and observed attack patterns, informs these estimates, so they do not rest on intuition alone. For example, repeated credential stuffing activity or regular timeouts on a key service may justify increasing likelihood scores even without a full-blown incident. By grounding estimates in observed behavior, you make it easier to revisit and refine them as the environment changes. With risks characterized, you map each one to preventive, detective, and responsive controls in a structured way. Preventive controls might include stronger authentication, stricter network segmentation, hardened configurations, or rate limiting on exposed interfaces. Detective controls cover log correlation in security information and event management (SIEM) platforms, anomaly detection, and targeted alerts that match your defined threats. Responsive controls capture playbooks, trained incident responders, escalation paths, and automation that can contain or mitigate problems quickly. For every control, you name an owner responsible for design, operation, and evidence, so there is no ambiguity when an auditor or executive asks who is accountable. This mapping turns risk statements into actionable control portfolios. Evaluating residual risk means asking what remains after those controls are in place and working as intended. For each scenario, you consider whether the combination of preventive, detective, and responsive measures brings risk down to a level the organization can tolerate. Decisions fall into the classic options to avoid, reduce, transfer, or accept, but here they are backed by explicit rationale tied to business context. Avoid might mean discontinuing a fragile feature. Reduce could involve further hardening. Transfer might rely on insurance or contractual terms. Accept remains a conscious choice. Mental simulations of incidents are a practical way to test whether your risk decisions make sense in real time. You walk through high-priority scenarios step by step, asking how containment would proceed, who would communicate with customers and regulators, and how recovery time objectives, RTO, would be met. These rehearsals surface hidden assumptions, such as reliance on a single subject matter expert, fragile manual steps, or unclear authority for difficult calls. They also reveal whether monitoring and alerting would actually give responders enough time to act before damage escalates. Treating these simulations as serious tabletop exercises, not casual conversations, helps align expectations across security, operations, and business teams. Prioritizing control changes is where operational risk analysis meets finite budgets and human patience. You weigh the cost of each proposed change, including engineering time, licenses, and training, against the expected reduction in exposure. Friction for users and operators is considered explicitly because controls that make daily work significantly harder are often bypassed or quietly rolled back. You focus first on changes that yield measurable improvements for high-impact risks without crippling productivity, such as improving alert quality, tightening critical access paths, or automating simple containment actions. This pragmatic prioritization keeps your risk program from drifting into theoretical perfectionism that never ships. Defining indicators and thresholds turns your analysis into a set of dials that can drive action automatically or semi-automatically. Indicators might include authentication failure rates, queue depths, delay in critical batch jobs, error spikes on payment endpoints, or unusual patterns in administrative activity. For each indicator, you define thresholds that, when crossed, trigger playbooks, alerts, or automated protective actions like rate limiting or temporary feature reduction. These thresholds should connect back to your risk estimates, reflecting the point where likelihood or impact moves into unacceptable territory. Over time, tuning these parameters becomes a continuous improvement exercise, sharpening the organization's sensitivity to emerging issues. Validation is where you test whether your chosen controls and indicators actually work under stress. Drills and tabletop exercises rehearse manual and semi-automated responses, while chaos experiments introduce controlled failures into non-production or carefully bounded production environments. Post-incident comparative analysis examines how real events matched your scenarios, how quickly controls engaged, and where reality diverged from expectations. You adjust controls, playbooks, and risk estimates based on these observations, recognizing that both technology and behavior evolve. This cycle keeps your operational risk analysis honest and grounded in lived experience rather than static documentation. Recording assumptions, dependencies, and review dates ensures that analysis remains a living artifact instead of a static report. Assumptions might include expected response times from third parties, stability of certain architectures, or legal interpretations that shape risk appetite. Dependencies capture upstream and downstream services, key personnel, and external providers whose reliability your controls depend on. Review dates and triggers, such as major releases or regulatory changes. Define when you will revisit specific risk items. By capturing these elements, you make it far easier to update the analysis in an orderly way, rather than starting from scratch after each significant change. Effective operational risk analysis also depends on clear communication of trade-offs and realistic delivery timelines. You translate risk scores, control mappings, and validation results into plain language that product owners, operations leaders, and executives can absorb. This includes acknowledging what you are not doing yet and why, rather than pretending that every gap will be closed immediately. You work to secure cross-team commitments, agreeing on which improvements will be delivered in which timeframes and how progress will be tracked. When this communication is open and candid, risk analysis becomes a shared decision-making tool rather than a security-only artifact. A brief mental review of the process shows a coherent loop, not a set of disconnected tasks. You begin with an inventory that captures services, dependencies, privileges, and critical transactions, then analyze plausible threats and failure modes using today's intelligence and telemetry. That analysis maps cleanly into controls, prioritization, and indicators that support both prevention and response, all validated by drills and real-world feedback. Governance elements like residual risk decisions, recorded assumptions, and scheduled reviews keep the whole structure aligned with business reality. Above all, sustained communication ensures that everyone understands both the risks and the chosen responses. The practical conclusion for episode 50 is to anchor these ideas in one real operational risk and move a single control forward. That might be the risk of prolonged payment gateway outage, widespread account takeover, or silent data corruption in settlement processes. For that risk, you can revisit your inventory, refine likelihood and impact, map existing controls, and decide on one concrete improvement, such as tightening administrative access or improving failure detection. Planning and executing this focused change demonstrates how analysis leads to action rather than just better diagrams. For an exam candidate, that habit of turning risk insight into implemented control is a defining marker of professional assurance. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.